Hello and welcome back to Ashley Main Makes. So today I am making a Son de Flor inspired skirt. Son de Flor is one of those linen cottagecore Instagram brands that I've been coveting for a while now, but like many of the brands in this genre on Instagram, they don't make anywhere near my size. So I thought I would try my hand at making one. I saw this beautiful linen at Fabric Mart and I thought not only was it dying to be made into a fall skirt, but this would be a really good opportunity to show you kind of a basic beginner project and really go into detail about that iconic white hem. To do this, I'm using the free charm pattern circle skirt and I'll leave it in the link down below, but feel free to use any circle skirt that you have readily at hand. I'll show you how to do all the hacks on this. I'm just using this one because it comes in a great size range and it is definitely more of a retro length, which helps you kind of get the look of this circle skirt. This is kind of a part one of this video to start us off with. But I am going to be recreating the classic dress up here shortly. So please do subscribe down below if you'd like to see that. And let's jump on into the video. So before we get going here, I just thought I would show you this skirt from Loud Bodies. That's one of my favorite skirts that I have a sneaking suspicion is very similar to that Son de Flor skirt that I'm recreating. And what it actually has is a lining. So it has this kind of lightweight lining in it. And as you can see, it's got like a smooth seam up here. And that's actually all attached in between. So the waistband, the lining, and the skirt are all connected together inside, and then the lining comes over and it gives you a really nice smooth look. So I think I'm going to incorporate that into my skirt. It's just a pretty short lining, like it's not very long, but it's enough to get rid of kind of all the lumps and bumps, which is nice. So I think I'm definitely going to do that, and I love how that finishes off. The other thing this has is one of those dreaded floppy pockets. As much as I wear this skirt, this does drive me crazy. So obviously we're not going to have the evil floppy pockets, but we are going to be having regular pockets, and these aren't understitched, so they do poof out. This is a prime example of how that kind of poofs, just to clean it up a little bit and keep it from doing that. And obviously tie it into the waistband so we don't have the floppy cell phone issue. So yeah, so I just thought I'd show you, that's kind of the construction that I'm basing this on. All right, so to get started here, I've just gone ahead and ironed what is going to be our hem facing fabric and our lining fabric, which is just this basic bleached linen, and our main fabric, which is a beautiful yarn dyed linen twill. This is what I noticed they used on the Son de Flor website. So when I saw this, I had to have it. Also, it's just the colors, my colors, all my colors. So gotten busy, done that. Obviously it's linen, need to do that. It's not as flat as I would like, but this has been wrapped around a thing for a while. Those creases are kind of stuck. It's good enough for cutting. And then next, I have gotten cut out all my pieces of that charm pattern circle skirt. Again, you definitely don't need to use this circle skirt pattern. Feel free to use whatever one you have or draft one yourself. I'm just using this one because I'm lazy and it's free. And it only has like 4 pieces here. So we've got a skirt front, a skirt back, a pocket, and a waistband. The only difference between the skirt front and the skirt back is that the skirt front is cut on the fold. Skirt back is not, because that's where you would put in a zipper. So for me, because I'm omitting the zipper, I'm actually going to cut 2 skirt fronts out of my main fabric. Next, we have the skirt back. So what I'm going to use the skirt back for is actually to cut my linings out of. For my lining, I don't care if I've got a seam necessarily. Well, do I care? Yeah, I kind of care. One of the other things to note while I'm doing this is I've actually cut this 2 sizes bigger than what I would normally be if it was just a straight circle skirt to accommodate the elastic. This is so that the elastic is the wide enough measurement that it'll go over my hips. So I would say if you're more than about 2 to 3 sizes difference, like you are quite a bit more of an hourglass or pear-shaped than I am, that I would probably go ahead and add that zipper in there. Because I am an apple and I have a very minimal difference between my waist and my hips. Having a zipper in there creates almost too much space and the elastic can't stretch like enough and it falls down. So for me, I'm omitting the zipper. I would say if you have a large difference between your waist and your hips, I would maybe add the zipper in the back. I don't know if necessarily I would do it like the Son de Flor skirt. If I was to add a zipper, I don't think it looks as elegant as it could. I would definitely use the instructions that comes with this charm pattern for a nice lap zipper in the back. That would be my personal opinion, and like I say, there's instructions right in the pattern for that. First things first, we have to fix the floppy pocket situation. This paper I got printed at the Plotted Pattern Company, which is a new to me printing company, and I really like this paper a lot. This is their standard paper, and it's just a little bit lighter than regular paper, like regular A0 that you would get, and it's a little bit transparent, so it lets you see the lines through, which I really am enjoying. And you can also see like large prints, which is something I do a lot. So would definitely recommend. I just thought I'd throw that out there while I do this, if you're wondering this magic. They also have straight up tissue available, so you could print straight on tissue if you prefer that. So anyway, basically a small ad for them, but makes this a lot easier. So you can see I've got the original charm pocket here. These little notches would be normally where it lines up. And for me, yes, that is the same probably as the skirt I've got, but I don't love that as a thing. That seems a little low. I usually, for me, because I've got such a short torso, I usually have it about 2 inches below my waist minus the 5/8, so probably about there is about right for me versus what they've got. That's just a personal preference. It'll vary from person to person what you like, and you'll discover that over time. You could definitely just go with what they have to start with. It looks like it's about 1 inch difference for me. So yeah, so we're just gonna go ahead and I'm gonna mark in the waistline here on this pocket, and I've already kind of done a slash up from this curve here. So all I have to do is trim that off, and I've got my pocket pattern. And so you'll need to cut 4 of these. So the next thing I'm gonna do here is check the length. So for me, I do like these skirts about 27 inches for this sort of style. So I'll need that plus the seam allowance, which in this pattern is 5/8. So, and that gives me like 28-ish. So I'm gonna see what size that most corresponds to, sort of like right smack in between. So I think I'm gonna go with the slightly longer one here, just because these Son de Flor ones are quite long, and I'm just gonna cut it off right here. And this is important to check, especially if you're adding that hem facing like we're doing. The next step is I'm gonna mark where that lining piece is gonna go, and based on measuring it, I've looked at that it's about 20 inches with the seam allowance, and so I've started off by marking that on both ends here, and so I'm just gonna go along my seam line here. All right, so I've got my tracing paper all laid out here. So all I'm gonna do, luckily these are straight on the sides, all I'm gonna do is trace out my top waistline. Make sure you're adding your notches here. Again, if you were adding a zipper to this, you would probably want to make sure that you trace a copy of the front and the back, but that's totally up to you. I'm not going to worry about transferring these pocket notches because I'm disregarding them, but you do you. And then I'm also going to make sure I've marked my grain line on here as well. Got all my lining laid out here, and I'm going to be using just shy of 2 yards for my lining. So now we are going to work on what makes a Son de Flor skirt look like a Son de Flor skirt, which is the hem facing. So I have another almost 2 yards here of this white linen, 59 inches to be exact, which is the same as the width of the fabric. So that gives us a perfect square. Now, this is the most efficient way to do this, but this is going to give you way more than you need for one skirt. That being said, I absolutely love this method of hem facing. It is so easy and gives such a nice finish that I'm going to use all of this. So definitely consider doing this. This will give you about 18 yards worth of hem facing when I counted, which is enough to do about 3 or so circle skirts at my size. So do with that information what you will. So what we're gonna do, this is already folded in a triangle on the bias here. It's like hanging a little bit off the table. And I'm gonna treat the fold as a line that I'm gonna cut. And I'm just going to be marking 5 1/4 inches. This is enough to give you a 4-inch wide facing with 2 5/8 of an inch seam allowances. You can, of course, reduce your seam allowances. I'm just sticking with what is currently on the pattern, and I'm really used to 5/8 because I've worked a lot with commercial patterns. But you can, of course, skimp on this. This will give us a finished size of 4 inches wide for the hem facing, which looks about right to me compared to what they have. And I'm using a water soluble marker here, so don't freak out, but also if you don't have one, that's no big deal. All this will be trapped in the seam allowance. And I'm just doing it this way on camera so you can see what I'm doing. If you want to use chalk, whatever you got, feel free. Moving on, I'm gonna mark all the way down, and then I'm just gonna do it again. And we're gonna mark it again and again. And this is gonna give us many strips. Work your way all the way to the corner as close as you feel like, and I'll show you how to attach these strips in a bit. So I love plaids, but the thing that deeply sucks about plaid is lining the plaid up. So what I've done is lined up the plaid on both sides and pinned it together, pinned it all over sporadically, matching up the plaid sections all the way around. So hopefully it'll be fairly even when I go to cut it. All right, so here's my first piece laid out on top of my fabric so I can match the plaid all the way around. And obviously you can barely see it, but that's kind of the point. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this second piece out, and then it'll match up perfectly. And then I'll show you how I'll match the pocket plaid. Here's my pockets. And as you can see, all I did was line it up across this, so the part that matches up is horizontal, so just match that up. So even though I'm going to understitch, if you do peek in the pocket, it'll look like the line's continuous, so it's just some extra nice finishing because we can. Also, I think I'm just going to leave the seam allowance. It's kind of fun. It says like European linen on it. It's got like, I know it's like a little stiffer. It'll wash and wear better. There's no point taking it off. So I'm just going to keep it, and we're just going to sew it up as it is. And that'll save me from finishing this whole side. So this is the original charm waistband. How this works is it would have one seam at the back by the zipper. Obviously, if you're going to keep the zipper, that is totally fine. But in my case, because I'm making it elastic all the way through, I'm going to want to put my side seams at each side. What I did was I have folded it in half and measured this length, and then added 5/8 to the end for my seam allowance that's now missing. I measured my elastic. So this particular elastic is 1.5. And I think that's about right based on measuring that other skirt that I currently have and then looking at the website and the proportions of the Son de Flor one. So you're going to want to add 1/4 inch to that on each side for wiggle room, for the elastic to move easily. And then you're going to want to double it because we're folding it in half. And then you need to add your seam allowance to it, which again is 5/8 for this project. So that gives me a total of 4 3/4. So that's what I have mapped out here. So I'm just gonna cut that out. And because I'm doing elastic, you do not need to interface it. All right, so I'm gonna hop back over to the hem facing here, and I've got one of my chunks, my bias chunks here. Now, the way you'd think you'd attach these together would be like this, but what that does is actually give you a 90-degree angle. So we don't want to do that. The way you actually want to attach these things is at a 90-degree angle, something like this. And you'll want to have like a little bit of overlap on each side to give you room to do a seam allowance, because this will actually give you a straight line with a nice bias seam, and that'll disappear really well into your skirt. This is definitely like something to do when you're chilling one night. This is not something to do when you're like in a bad mood. This is a don't drive angry situation. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna mark my seam allowance here. So that gives me a guideline of where I'm gonna sew this. All right, so I've got my pieces here, and I'm just gonna line my needle up with that blue line I made. All right, so here's that seam I just made. And so I'm gonna roll onto the end here, and I'm gonna do the same thing again. So I've got my piece, and I'm gonna lay it like this and line it up. Now, if I did it like this, this would be bad because you can see where this seam is. So if I did it like this seam would be on the opposite side. So what I need to do is flip this like this, and that way both seams will be on the right side. This seems very straightforward, but do double check this. Ask me how I know. Now we have a nice continual piece, just a couple of seams in there. And it does tend to alternate with these sort of chevrons. Obviously this is the very end of that triangle that I cut, so it'll get better as we go. And these will become further and further apart, but I'm trying to use as much fabric as I can. So we're gonna continue rolling, adding seams until we get one big long piece, and then I'm gonna iron it all at the end. I am getting started, and the first thing I'm gonna do, before I even let this sit around too long, is I'm gonna stay stitch the whole waistband of all my pieces. Because this is linen and it's a really loose weave, it is pretty prone to this stretching anywhere it's on the bias. So this is a really important first step on this, especially because it's linen. You know, I'm being extra good because it is so shifty and stretchy. So there we are. It's not perfect, but it's about a 1/4 inch away, and it'll just prevent this curve from stretching out as I'm working with this. So I'm gonna go ahead and do this to all my pieces. All right, so we're back with my serger here, and I've just serged all the way around the raw edge of my pocket, and I'm just going to be serging around all the raw edges anywhere I don't have this seam allowance. Obviously where there's the seam allowance it's not going to fray, and I'm just leaving it on this project because it's kind of fun. Just going to leave that, and I'm going to leave the top where it's going to be caught in the waistband, but you do want to make sure you've finish your edges really well. Linen does have a tendency to fray when you wash it quite badly, and so you probably want to do something beyond like a pink. So you definitely want to, like, if you don't have a serger, use something like a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine, or an overlock stitch, something like that, just to keep it in place. So I'm just going to go ahead and prep all my pieces, and we're going to pop back in when we're putting the pockets on. All right, so I just have my 2 lining pieces pinned together here and ready to roll on my machine while I still have the white thread set up from doing the giant bias binding. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this, and then I'm going to swap my threads, and we're going to move back to the outside. All right, so I have my pocket pinned on to my side of my skirt here, and I've got it pinned in such a way where I'm matching the plaid across so that it looks like the stripe continues on into the pocket, and I've got this lined up with the edge of the selvage, so we're going to go right along there with my now newly loaded green thread. All right, so I'm back on the ironing board here, and I just ironed the lining seams open flat. I have my skirt here, my skirt pocket, so I'm just gonna iron that flat first. And then I'm gonna flip this over like that, and then press it towards the pocket. Now, pressing it flat first, just make sure that we're getting as close as we can to that stitch line, so we're not going to get any bubbles in there. Now, I don't think I mentioned this, but obviously this is bigger than 5/8, so I did account for that in my pattern to leave this larger, basically like 1 inch seam allowance, so I could keep the selvage in here. So just so you know. All right, so I'm back on the machine, and here's my pocket piece, and there's that seam I just ironed flat, so the seam allowance is going this way, and so I'm just going to do some understitching here and sew that seam allowance down to the pocket. And you won't really see this on the final garment too much because it'll be inside the pocket and it'll just hold that seam forward. So I'm just going just barely to the right of this. I'm using this left hand side in my foot here as a guide. All right, so we've reached the point where we want to slow down and be careful here for a second. So I've got my two sides here, right side to right side, and I've just started matching up my plaid. I'm going to be sewing all the way around this edge of this pocket and then down the side of the skirt, but I am starting to work where my pocket's going to line up to start with, and I'm just going to make sure. So the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to take my pin and I'm going to find where the cross of the plaid meets. And then I'm going to look underneath and go, nope, that doesn't quite match. I'm going to line it up with the cross of the plaid in the bottom piece and just keep working down my skirt. So, and even if there's a little bubble in there, that's fine. I would rather that than not have my plaid line up. So that's obviously where the plaid has stretched, or the fabric has stretched a little bit. Alright, so after I've gotten those sewn on, I've just ironed my seam allowances forward to what is going to be the front of my skirt on both sides. Doesn't really matter which, because don't really have a front and back because I don't have a zipper. And I've just pinned it along the top here. So I'm actually going to base this in place. And then meanwhile, I have also ironed the couple pieces of my waistband together, and I've ironed this in half. So usually when I do my ironing, I like to do it in batches of things. So I'll sew a few seams that I can, and then I'll iron, and then I'll sew a few more seams. So I'm going to baste this, and then I'm going to baste this on. All right, so I threw this down the other night because I realized that this waistband doesn't really line up with the plaid, and I was trying to decide how annoyed I was about that. So I'm just going to recut it for my sanity, only line up really with the center stripe and then move away. But I kind of think I wanted to, since I have the scrap, I might as well. So just something to be aware of with a plaid. Obviously, I didn't really think about it at the time. I was just cutting easy strips, but all right. So I'm back with my newly remade waistband piece here. And you can see this is the front of my skirt. And you can see already where it's warping past my stay stitching. So that would have been really bad if I hadn't done that, because then this whole thing would have been warped out, and I mean that's starting to get into like 1/4 inch territory. You do that across the whole thing, it gets really difficult. If you are not using a plaid and you're using a solid, it's really important to notch the center of your skirt and your waistband so that you can match that up. And then I'm going to match up my side seams here. So I'm going to pin those together, and then I'm going to work it along. So I'm going to kind of work it into the waistband so that it fits the waistband. I often find, even with the stay stitching and everything, there might be a little bit of puckering. So you want to make sure you work it along, and I'm going to pin it all the way along. So as much as I just got this all eased in and pinned, I think I'm going to ease on the lining at the same time. You could, of course, just base this and attach this, but sort of worried about the rippling, so I'm just going to attach my lining at the same time. What you want to do is put like right side to right side with the waistband in the middle. So you can see that that's like the outside of my pocket there. And then this is my lining. So this is gonna come like that. And then I've decided I'm gonna leave my gap right here. So you need to leave a gap in between your stitching for that elastic to be inserted into. So I'm gonna leave the distance from this pin to this pin open, which is like a good couple of inches, so that I have enough room to thread my elastic through here and all the way around. I'm not doing it at the very back here where my plaid is meeting up. I'm doing it a little ways along. We basically have a skirt now, but because it's a circle skirt, it really needs to hang. Normally they say like a minimum of 24 hours. Because this is linen and a really loose weave, I'm going to hang it up for probably a few days here, just so it stretches out as much as it's going to. I really don't want to do this again. I have my slit all pinned up here, and you can already sort of tell that it has already stretched on the bias just from hanging out on my sewing room. So this is a super critical step and do not skip it. So just let it hang out, ignore it for a few days. Even though we are so close, it's sort of painful. But we're back 5 days later, and I just thought I would show you the difference in the hem here. So you can see just how much that has stretched in certain spots. It almost looks like a shark bite hem, whatever they call those, or something like that. So obviously it was really good to let this hang, especially in this loose weave linen. So before I go any further with evening up that shark bite hem, I'm gonna go back here and put my elastic in my waistband. So I've got my pin still where that gap is. Find that opening here in my waistband piece. And then I've got my elastic here, and I've just put a giant safety pin through it, the biggest one you've got, and I've wrapped it around my waist, and I've roughly marked how long the elastic needs to be. Generally, even when I'm making a pattern that has a length for an elastic, everyone's elastic is a little bit different, so it's gonna depend. So I like to start out with test wrapping it around my waist and just marking it, and then I'll try it on and make sure that tightness is gonna work with the weight of the skirt on it. And thread this into my waistband, and I'm just gonna work it all the way along till I get to my mark. All right, so I've got my elastic woven all the way through my waistband, and then I've just flipped my safety pin around at that mark where I estimated I needed to cut the elastic off so that I can try this on with my test fit. Now I am leaving the whole rest of the elastic on here for now, so that if I need to move it out some more, I can. But I'm gonna go try this on, and I'm gonna see if I like how tight this is with the weight of the skirt on it. So sorry for the janky setup here, but I just thought I would give you sort of the first glimpse of the skirt, which is kind of exciting. So I'm just trying it on to test for this elastic fit, and if I'm happy with how tight it is. Overall, this is pretty good. I think I might make it a little bit tighter, just because when I put like my phone or a pair of scissors in there, it does have a tendency to like kind of weigh down the side of the skirt here in the elastic. So if this was a bit tighter, it would stay. But otherwise, super happy. Always super exciting doing the first try on. Kind of gives you that motivation to keep rolling. Obviously, you can see how ridiculously uneven that hem is again. I think it might have even stretched on the straight grain a little bit this time too. And you can see how much it's stretched. Even this one section's like basically back down to my ankles. So we really need to even this up. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. All right, so we're back, and I've just pulled that elastic in a little bit, and then I've got it overlapped like a couple inches here and pinned. Now, I know a lot of people butt end of end elastic and zigzag across it, and that's how they do it. But for me, I found when I've done that, like obviously this elastic frays pretty easily, so I don't want to have that issue, and I don't mind if there's like a bit of a lump of thickness. So I'm just gonna overlap them like this, and I'm gonna zigzag with a really dense zigzag over the middle here to hold these together. And we're done. I just zigzagged back and forth a couple times. Honestly, it's not super pretty, but it's really strong. So we can go ahead and close up our opening. So originally I was gonna just lay my pattern piece back out on top of this to true the hem. Yes, I know that's not a proper way of doing a hem, but because we have so much to cut off, and that's what I imagine they must have to do with these skirts, because I don't see a way around it. But I was trying to do that, and it's really hard with the elastic in the middle still. So I really should have done that before I gathered the elastic. So hot tip, you could probably do it that way if you wanted. So instead, I am just doing sort of a hemming cheater method. So I've just been going along and marking with my tape measure. All right, so we're back inside the skirt. I sewed up that opening, and now you can see how gross and messy this is now. You can see how much this linen frays. So I'm just gonna run it through the serger again. I did figure out that these weren't like pulled down into here, so actually it wasn't getting the tension that it was supposed to be getting. It just wasn't clicked again when I was moving my serger around. So lesson learned. I mean, I still think there's something up and it's not perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than what it was. I did my test here, so like pretty good. There's still some looping going on, but like much less messy. So we're gonna go with this. All right, so that's all done in there. All this is serged, and then like I say, I just went all the the way around the lining here, and I think I'm just gonna leave this. Of course, if you don't have a serger, you could just turn this up, like baby hem it, turn it up again, and do that. I was gonna turn this up, but I think honestly I'm gonna leave it. You're never gonna see it, and this way it'll lie flatter under the skirt. And then, like I say, same here, you could trim off all your yucky bits and give it a nice zigzag over top, and you'd be good to go. All right, so I have here that bias binding that I made, world's largest bias binding. I have it wrapped just around some cardboard that I used to wrap my fabric around. This is actually like 1.5 batches of bias binding that we made, because I had done this technique before just to test it, see how it is. But I'm just gonna unroll like a little bit just to get us started, but for the most part I'm gonna leave it on the roll. All right, so I have my skirt here, and this is actually like right side out. You can see there's the pocket and the waistband. So I have this right side out, and I've got one of my side seams here. Now I'm gonna put the right side to the right side of the binding, so that means your folded flap is facing up, and I'm gonna pin this so that it's just past my side seam, so I have something to stitch it together with later. If you want to pin this whole thing, you can, but I find it's easier just to continually line it up as we stretch and go here. So I'm going to line up my needle with my side seam here and 5/8, because I'm working off that 5/8 seam allowance. Again, you don't necessarily have to adjust this to you, but I'm doing 5/8 because the whole pattern's in 5/8, and that's what I cut the binding for. I'm gonna keep my skirt underneath. Now we've trimmed this already, so we're gonna be very careful not to stretch that skirt piece. See how springy that bias piece is? So I'm just going to lightly stretch it as I stitch so that it matches that curve. Like, I've got these two fingers on my bottom, these ones on my top, so I can give myself that bit of tension. So I'm just to the end of the line here, then back to the beginning. So all I'm doing is I'm just creeping up to that seam. That tack here. And pull this off. There's the end there. I don't know if you can see that. Sort of unfortunate we ended on a seam here. So I'm just gonna cut that with a little bit of allowance there. You can see that. All I'm gonna do is just pin these. Is trying to find my seam here. Get as close as you can. You could even use like a zipper foot or something like that. Just gonna trim this other side down so that we have a completed seam, and then I'm gonna take this over to the ironing board and press that open. All right, so I'm just back on that side seam here, and I've just pressed it open and flat. The reason I did this on the side here is because the seam is the one place that is on the straight and not on the bias. So it's important to stop at some place where you can do that. You can just sort of see like how that wants to curve now against that, because we had that bit of tension on there as we were sewing it. So all I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna press all of this forward really solidly. Forward towards the bottom of the skirt. Go all the way around that, and then we're gonna understitch. And I'm not gonna worry about this bubble here. I'm just ironing this seam here. All right, so I'm just back on the machine here, and I'm just gonna do a little bit of understitching now that that's all sewn on. Just line this up, and I'm gonna sew as close to this fold as I can manage, pretty much. And I'm just gonna try and keep a little bit of tension on this seam as we go, even though we ironed it, just to make sure it's like as flat as we can manage. All right, so I've just got my hem flipped up here onto the inside. I'm just keeping it so that it's rolled to the back, because of that understitching we have a nice little layer here, and there's a little bit of a wibble, but it's really not that bad because we did that tension to keep it matching up with the curve. All I'm gonna do is get a really hot iron with a good bit of steam, because linen can handle it, and just flatten it right out. And it gives us a really nice, smooth, flat finish there. Would I do this with anything other than linen? Probably not. You might be able to get away with a really loosely woven cotton that wasn't very thick, but I definitely wouldn't do a band this thick. You know, kind of that flexibility of the loose weave linen makes this possible. If I was going to do it with another material, I might do a pure like facing or something like that, but this is what I suspect they're doing because you would be making a lot of these of different sizes. So I'm just going to roll around and continue ironing the whole thing, and then we're going to be back. All right, so we are just on to the final stage of the project here, and I'm just going to do this the way Son de Flor does. So I have my top thread loaded with the white to match my lining, and the bottom is green to match the front of my fabric. Now you could definitely do this the way I showed in my 18th century video by doing a blind hem stitch, but I was finding this really shifty because of how loosely woven this top linen is. So do what's best for you. You could definitely also hand stitch this, but since this is their method, that's what I'm going ahead with. All right, we are feature complete here. So you can see that green stitch on the top here, and then all that lovely white hem looking very nice. It's gonna be so twirly. In conclusion, I really love this project. I think it's one of the nicest things I've made in a while that I'm gonna wear a lot. I'm probably gonna wear it a lot just for everyday wear, because with that elastic in there, it is so comfortable. And I also think it looks really elegant. It is really a testament to a simple thing done well with good materials really gives you a wonderful result. And it's not always that we have to have all the details and all the stitching and all the pieces to get something fabulous. I definitely think a beginner could handle this project, and I actually think that hem facing is really easy to pull off. I will be doing it on so many more projects, so just watch this space. There's going to be white hems on everything, not only because I have so much binding left, but also I just think it gives the cleanest, nicest result. The weight of that hem also really helps with the swoosh factor of the skirt and the shape of the skirt. It helps hold the hem out and really give you that classic look. I'm kind of blown away by these side-to-side images. I really think I nailed it, both in the length and just kind of the drape of how this skirt sits. The only thing I might tweak in the future is the pocket size. Those charm pockets aren't graded as well as I might like, so I think I would opt for my standard cashmerette pocket that I normally use and hack it really similar to what I did on the Rose Claire dress, which I'll leave somewhere in a card up above here. Overall, I am ridiculously happy with this. I'm definitely going to be making a couple more, and I will be doing this hem facing again, and I'm probably going to create a couple more of those projects like I mentioned from Son de Flor. So let me know if there's any particular garments you'd like to see, or like cottagecore, linen brand inspired projects you'd like to see. I would be super happy to recreate them. Probably going to do it anyway. And thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you really got something out of it. And if you kind of recreate this hem facing at all, please do tag me. I'm on Instagram at AshleyMainMakes, the same as my channel here. And thank you so much for watching. Bye!